When his toxic mother-in-law got herself evicted, on purpose, she smiled and said, "Guess I'm moving back to my old house." But the house was gone, and so was everyone's patience. This Just No Mill story time is full of family betrayal, narcissism, and a final ultimatum you'll never forget. Have you ever met someone who creates chaos just to force your hand? What if that person was your mother-in-law, and not just any mother-in-law, but a toxic mother-in-law who smiled after getting evicted? This Just No Mill story time begins 2 years after my father-in-law passed away. He was the one holding everything together, financially, emotionally, even socially. When he died, my MIL couldn't afford to keep the house anymore. Most of his pension died with him. It was tough, and honestly, my wife really tried her best. Instead of letting her mother hit rock bottom, my wife, who I swear has the patience of a saint, helped her find a beautiful 55 Aspling Plus HUD apartment just half a mile from our house. Close enough to check in, far enough for boundaries. Sounds like a win, right? Well, if you've ever followed toxic family Reddit threads, you probably know what comes next. The peace didn't last long. Within weeks, the complaints from neighbours started rolling in. The TV was blasting at all hours. She hoarded food donations from the local pantry like it was the apocalypse. She picked fights over laundry schedules. And get this, she called the police on neighbours just because she didn't like the way they looked at her. We're talking full husband-mom drama turned community nightmare. At first, we thought maybe it was grief. Losing a spouse can break people. But as the months passed, we realised it wasn't grief, it was control. My MIL didn't want independence. She wanted attention, power, to be catered to, the classic narcissistic mother-in-law move. Despite multiple warnings, interventions, and even a formal sit-down with building management, nothing changed. Until one day, the eviction notice came. And how did she react? With a smug smile and these exact words, "Well, looks like I'll be moving back into my house after all." Let that sink in. Her house had been sold and was under renovation. My wife had told her this repeatedly. It wasn't just delusion, it was manipulation, a play. One last attempt to guilt her way back into our home, to break boundaries, to restart the cycle. And here's the thing, it almost worked. If my wife hadn't literally driven her by the old house to prove it was no longer hers. You see, this isn't just one of those crazy Millhouse stories. It's a masterclass in emotional leverage, in rewriting the rules of relationship drama podcast content. But it begs the question, when someone you love weaponizes their own downfall just to invade your space, what do you owe them? Where does empathy end and self-protection begin? Let me know your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation like this? Drop a comment, I'd love to hear your story. So what do you do when someone's behavior gets them kicked out, and they still think they're the victim? After my toxic mother-in-law smugly announced she'd be moving back to her old house, the one that had already been sold, reality had to hit her hard. My wife literally drove her there, parked out front, and showed her the construction crew gutting the place. Her face, blank, no apology, no, "Oops, guess I was wrong," just silence. And I think that's when it really sank in for us. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate, a calculated power play. This whole eviction, it wasn't just the result of bad luck or misunderstanding. It was her own doing. She pushed boundaries, picked fights, and ignored every warning, almost like she wanted to be forced out. And when it finally happened, she thought it would guilt us into letting her back into our home. You ever read those Reddit stories mother-in-law fans post, where someone seems to orchestrate their own downfall just to create drama? This was one of those. A Just No Mill podcast moment in real life. Now, here's where things shifted. While I was still biting my tongue, my wife, bless her heart, didn't give up. She called every local agency, pulled every string, and managed to get her mom approved for an assisted living facility. Not a nursing home, not some understaffed dump, a clean, friendly, 3-year-old center with 24/7 care, crafts, bingo, housekeeping, even weekly church services. But when we came to help pack up her apartment, things went sideways, fast. She was bitter, cold. She refused to help. And when she finally snapped with, "Nobody even asked me what I want, I'd had enough," that's when I stepped in. And yes, what I said may sound harsh, but let me ask you, how many chances do you give someone who keeps blowing them up in your face? I told her, "You lost the right to make demands when you intentionally got yourself evicted. Now you have a choice. Move into this very nice assisted living center, or go to a homeless shelter. That's it. And just so we're clear, if you mess this place up too, you will never, ever move into my home. No second rescue mission, no new plan, no more guilt trips." Harsh? Maybe, but it was the truth. And sometimes, with a narcissistic mother-in-law, that's the only language that gets through. She didn't scream, she didn't argue, she just fake cried, and I told her, plainly, "Grow up. This isn't middle school." Now here's what I want to ask you. When setting boundaries becomes the only way to keep your peace, is being harsh still wrong? Can tough love be the most compassionate choice, especially with toxic family members who won't check? Have you ever seen someone fight against something for months, only to end up loving it? What if that person was your toxic mother-in-law, and what she ended up loving was the very life she once called a prison? After all the drama, the eviction, the confrontation, the ultimatum, my wife and I honestly didn't know how things would go. We dropped her off at the assisted living facility, expecting another meltdown, another guilt trip, maybe even a refusal to go in. But, to our surprise, she settled in, quietly. Now don't get me wrong, we were holding our breath. If you followed enough crazy MIL stories or toxic family Reddit threads, you know that silence usually means a storm is brewing. But not this time. A few days in, she started calling my wife. Not to complain, but casually chat. "The food's actually decent. The nurse here is sweet. I played bingo this morning. Didn't win, but it was fun." Wait, what? My wife and I were shocked. This is the same woman who once said she'd rather die than be put in a place like that. And now she was talking about craft classes, Sunday services, and how her neighbor knits scarves for cats. I mean, really. But maybe, just maybe, the structure, the attention, the daily routine, it was exactly what she needed. This wasn't a punishment, it was relief. For all of us. Here's the twist most people don't expect in these relationship drama podcast stories. Sometimes, your narcissistic mother-in-law doesn't need a fight. She needs a system she can't control. Because in her old apartment, there were too many open doors, too many people to manipulate, too many blurred boundaries. But in assisted living, there are rules, schedules, staff, boundaries are built in. And honestly, it's working. Yes, she still complains, of course. The eggs are too runny. The crafts are too childish. The other residents are nosy. But now, those complaints are background noise. There's no chaos, no emotional blackmail, no husband-mom drama hanging over us every week. And you know what else? Our marriage is lighter. My wife smiles more. Our kids aren't walking on eggshells. The peace in our home is noticeable. But here's what I keep wondering. What if we'd caved? What if we'd let her manipulate her way back into our house? Would we still be drowning in toxic mother-in-law behavior, just because we felt guilty? Sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone, and for yourself, is say no. Set the boundary, hold the line, and let the chips fall where they may. So tell me this. Have you ever had a moment where tough love led to unexpected peace? Do you believe some people actually thrive when they're no longer allowed to control the environment around them? Drop your stories in the comments. Let's talk about. It's easy to label people. Narcissistic mother-in-law, Reddit's JustNoMIL material, family drama podcast gold. But when the dust settles and life finds a new rhythm, sometimes you start asking deeper questions. Not to excuse the damage, but to understand the root of it. My father-in-law, from everything I saw, was the buffer. He kept her balanced. Their relationship might not have been perfect, but it was structured. He managed the finances, handled the social side, and, if I'm being honest, absorbed a lot of her emotional chaos, so the rest of the family didn't have to. When he passed, that buffer disappeared, and all of that energy, the manipulation, the drama, the entitlement, spilled over onto us. I don't say this to gain sympathy. My wife and I survived it. We set the boundary, enforced the line, and found a solution that gave everyone peace. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't sometimes wonder, was this always inside her, waiting to come out, or did grief amplify traits that had once been easier to ignore? We've heard these kinds of toxic family Reddit stories before, the ones that start with a funeral and end in a full-blown family fallout. And if you read between the lines, there's often a common thread. Unresolved grief turning into control, loss turning into manipulation, sadness turning into rage. Now that she's in assisted living, with structure and care and people around her 24/7, she's calmer, still opinionated, still stubborn, but manageable, and maybe that's all we ever could have hoped for. Here's where I feel torn, and maybe you felt this too. On one hand, I believe in compassion with boundaries. That's been our motto throughout this journey. But on the other hand, I think about what could have helped her sooner. Before the eviction, before the damage. Would grief counselling have made a difference? Would we have listened if she'd said she was scared, instead of just acting out? I don't know. What I do know is this. Boundaries protected us. They gave my kids a peaceful home. They gave my wife space to breathe. And ironically, they gave my mother-in-law exactly what she didn't know she needed. A life where she doesn't have to control everything to feel secure. So let me ask you this. When you're dealing with a toxic mother-in-law, how do you separate the person from the pain? How do you balance empathy with accountability, especially when the damage cuts deep, but the cause might be rooted in loss? Drop your stories in the comments. Whether it's grief, guilt, or generational patterns, let's open this conversation together. Let me ask you something. What does peace really look like after surviving a storm like this? Because if you had told me 2 years ago that my toxic mother-in-law, the woman who hoarded food, called the police on neighbours, and tried to manipulate her way back into our home, would be content in assisted living and no longer turning our lives upside down, I would have laughed. This wasn't a revenge story. It wasn't some perfectly wrapped-up narcissistic mother-in-law saga where the villain gets exposed and the hero walks away clean. It was messy, emotional, full of second-guessing. But here's the truth. We found peace. Not because she changed completely, but because we stopped letting her chaos dictate our home. It took boundaries. It took standing firm, even when it hurt. And it took letting go of the hope that we could fix her or make her grateful. A lot of you listening have been through similar crazy MIL stories. Whether it's the silent guilt, the emotional manipulation, or the endless drama that somehow always circles back to you, I know how heavy it can feel. And that's why I'm sharing this, because sometimes peace comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes it's not about changing the JustNoMIL in your life. It's about changing how you respond to her. My wife and I didn't win. There was no trophy at the end, but we got our home back, our marriage, our time, our sanity. And my mother-in-law, she's still herself, a little softer now, a little more contained. Maybe that's the best outcome we could have hoped for. Maybe in a weird way, everyone ended up where they needed to be. So, if you've made it this far in the story, thank you. Truly. These aren't easy conversations, especially when it comes to toxic family, mother-in-law drama, or drawing the kind of lines that others don't always understand. Now, here's where I want you to jump in. If you've ever dealt with a toxic mother-in-law, drop a consolis in the comments. If your JustNoMIL story had a twist, good or bad, leave a heartness. And if you've ever had to lay down a boundary that saved your peace, just type "Boundaries Matter" in in the comments so others know they're not alone. Let's flood the comments with real stories, real strength, and real support. Because somewhere out there, someone's listening who's right in the middle of their own family betrayal, husband-mom drama, or relationship nightmare. And your one comment might be the thing that helps them finally breathe. Until next time, this has been another JustNoMIL podcast, where real stories meet real healing.